Well, good morning. My name is Patrick. So glad you decided to be here today as we kick off a brand new series called The Fundamental List. I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but at 419, we have a diverse group of people here. For some of us, we grew up in church, and some of us didn't, right? And so some of us who did grow up in church, you grew up in church, and then there was a time in your life where you left church, and whether it was months or years, and now you're back and you're kind of trying to figure things out. For those of us who did grow up in church and spent some time in church, we have lots of different church backgrounds. Some of us grew up Baptist, and there are different types of Baptists, and we have some of those here in our midst at 419. Others of us grew up United Methodist. Some of you grew up Pentecostal. We have Catholics. We have non-denominational churches. We have all of these groups of people that have all of these different types of backgrounds. And so as we try to come together as a church, as one church, the question can become, okay, so what do we believe, right? Because we have all of these different traditions and you know, there are different churches who believe different things. And out of all of those churches I mentioned, and maybe I left yours out, if I did, I'm sorry, but we have all of these different ideas, and we all differ slightly in terms of some of the things we believe. There's some things that we agree on, and some things that we disagree on around things. And so what is it that we believe? And the truth is that probably none of those groups, if I'm honest, probably none of those groups have everything right, you know, and that includes us. But what we want to try to do here is to not talk about the things that are on the peripheral, right, that are non-essential. In this series, we're going to focus on, okay, what is essential to believe in order to follow Jesus? What does it look like to boil everything down and get to the core of what it means to follow Jesus and what we need to believe in order to do that? What are the essentials, the fundamentals to believe? So we're not going to talk about things like baptism, because some of us disagree on when to baptize and how to baptize and all of these things. So we're not talking about that, because that is not essential. That's not fundamental to following Jesus. But we are having a baptism service in a couple of weeks, and we'll explain more about that then. But that's not one of the fundamentals. And so what is it that we believe? What do we need to do and believe and think about in order to follow Jesus? Now, if you're here today and you're still trying to figure it all out, and you're trying to figure out, you know, did Jesus rise from the dead, or what's the deal with church or Christianity or all of that, I am so glad you're here today, because this is a series that I think will help you understand a lot of those things, and hopefully help you understand a lot of perhaps some of the questions that you may have toward that. So I think this series is going to be a great one for you. So I'd encourage you just to continue coming back and being plugged in during this series. But I think it's also helpful for others of you who may have grown up going to church, and maybe you're just coming back, or maybe you come from another tradition and you want to know, well, what is it that we believe here? And so we're going to do our best to be biblical and scriptural and be all about what Jesus taught. And so today, as we kind of kick off this thing to kind of help us do that in this way, we're going to talk about one essential today. And in order to do that, Jesus is going to help us. He's in a conversation with his closest guys, his small group, as Scotty said, right? And he's in a conversation with them, and he asks them a question. And I think it's so helpful for them in their journey to following Jesus, but I think it's so helpful for us, for you and for me, to ask the same question. And so we're going to look at that. To set the context, here it is. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, this is about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, just to give you a picture of where they're at. And he asked his disciples, that's his guys, his closest followers, his small group, if you will. He asked them, he says, who do people say the Son of Man is? Now, the Son of Man, that was a Jewish term that came from one of the prophets, Daniel. And so all of his closest guys, they were Jewish. And so they understood exactly what he was talking about here. So in order to get you kind of on the same page as his guys, I want to go back to Daniel and show you where this comes from. And so Daniel was about 500 plus years before Jesus, right? And so Daniel was a Jewish guy, and he had these dreams and visions from God. That's how God would speak to him, and then he wrote some of them down. And so he says, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. So it wasn't actually a man, but it was like a man. And so this idea, this picture of the Son of Man was this idea of their Messiah, right? That was one of the terms and titles they used for their Messiah. Their Messiah was the one that was going to come and save them. That was going to come and rescue them and be their Savior. And so the Son of Man was one of those titles. But he wasn't fully man. It was like a man. And then it says, and he was also coming with the clouds of heaven. And so here you get this picture of coming in, riding on the clouds. Well, who in Scripture rides on the clouds? It's God, right? So God is the one who rides on the clouds. So for Daniel, this picture of the Messiah that was coming to save the people was one like a son of man, but also God. And so he was going to be, this Messiah was going to be fully man, but was also going to be fully God. And so he approached this Son of Man, the Messiah. He approached the Ancient of Days, that's the Father in heaven, and was led into his presence. Daniel continues, he says, he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshiped him. That's the proper response to a person like this. That's the proper response to a Messiah. It says his dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away. And his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. And so in other words, here Daniel, in his picture of the Messiah, the one that was to come, this Son of Man was going to be fully man, and he was going to be fully God in some unique way. And he was going to have a kingdom and a dominion, and his kingdom would last forever. In other words, he would be a king. And so here Jesus is saying to his closest guys, he says, guys, who do people say the Son of Man is? The Messiah, the King, the one who was to come to save them. Well, his disciples replied. He said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And so that's what, as they walked through the streets of the towns and villages, and as they walked through, they could hear these people and talking about the Son of Man, and that was what they were hearing. And then Jesus kind of flips the question onto them, onto his closest guys, and he says, what about you? Okay, that's what everybody else is saying, but I want to know what you think. He says, what about you? Who do you say I am? And I think that was not only such a central question for them to understand, but I think that's the question for you and for me. Is who do you say that Jesus is? Because how we answer that affects our entire life. And how his guys answered this question affected their entire lives as well. So Peter jumps up. Peter's kind of like the spokesperson for the group. He's kind of like that guy in class when the teacher asks a question, he's always the first one to raise their hand. You know that person, right? Sometimes they don't even wait. They just blurt out the answer. Well, that's Peter, right? Peter answers, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus, you're the Messiah, the Son of Man, the one who was fully God and fully man. You're the one who's the King. over a kingdom that will last forever. You're the Son of God, the one that came from heaven. You're God's unique one and only Son, who's a king. And your kingdom is going to last forever. Jesus, that's who you are. Now, Jesus has a decision to make here. He can say, Peter, that ain't me. Peter, you're crazy. That's not how Jesus answered it. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, that's Peter's other name, Simon, son of Jonah. For this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. In other words, Peter, you're smart, but you're not that smart. You didn't come up with this on your own. The Father in heaven revealed this to you. And Peter is the one who's the spokesperson for the group. And I think in that moment, I don't think Peter quite fully understood all that he said and all that he meant with that. But I think in that moment, not only did he believe what he said, but I think the whole group believed what Peter said. I think they all believed that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God, the Son of Man who was fully man and fully God, who was king over a kingdom that would last forever. In that moment, I think they all believed that. But then, Jesus would be crucified. And when Jesus is crucified, they buried a king in a borrowed grave. And in that moment, none of them believed. None of them believed that Jesus was king, because in their box, in their God box that they thought about God, God always wins. And so when the king, whose kingdom is going to last forever, dies, they no longer think he's the king that's going to live forever and last forever. So in that moment, none of them believed. But then, Jesus rose from the dead. And in that moment, they believed again. And in that moment, everything changed for them. So it is so important for them, as you look at their life, to say, who is Jesus? And for them, he was the Son of the living God. And he was a king. And that's what you and I have to decide. Who is Jesus? And so for us today, our essential is that Jesus is God's Son and our King. That's essential number one. Is that Jesus is who he said he is who he claimed to be. So you and I have a decision to make. And for some of you, you may be trying to figure this out, and you may realize today for the first time that you've never believed that and submitted to that. Because that's what you do, right? That's the proper response to a king, is to worship and honor and adore and revere. But it's also to submit. And so that's our proper response to King Jesus. And for some of you here today may be you've never done that, and you just want to, maybe today's your day, and you want to just say to Jesus, Jesus, I submit to you as King, not just a king, not just the king, but my King. For others of you, you may have done that when you were little, and things kind of just got sidetracked. And maybe today, maybe today, you want to resubmit your life to your King. Because that's the proper response. And so I hope and pray that you will wake up tomorrow morning as you start your day and say, King Jesus, I submit to you. And on Tuesday, you wake up on Tuesday and say, King Jesus, I submit my life to you. I submit today to you. Be the king of my heart. Be the king of my life today. So that's my hope, and that's my prayer, is that you will submit to him. And not only is he worth our submission, but he's worth our honor and praise and glory. And so what I want to do is I want to invite you to stand. If you're able and if you're willing, I'd like to invite you to stand and prepare your hearts to give praise and honor and glory to King Jesus, because he's worth it. Because Jesus is not some uninvolved God. He's not some disinterested God. He's not some God that's far away. He's not the big guy in the sky. He's not 6 pound, 8 ounce baby Jesus. He's God's son. And he's our King. He's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He's the firstborn over all creation. He's all loving. He's all powerful. He's the King of kings and Lord of lords. He is truly a king like no other.